So, how'd you feel about being the bass player and the pastor yesterday?
It was good. Well, I used to do that all the time. And so it was very familiar, but I haven't done it in the last 4 years because our last church only had traditional worship. And so I didn't play music at all. And so there was a little bit of like,
Didn't offer to direct the choir?
No. But just like you got to manage your microphone and your monitor and your cables and your guitar strap. And it's just a lot of things on your body. And then you got to think about transitions and where am I supposed to be and what am I supposed to be doing? And do I have the charts pulled up or is it my sermon? I brought the tablet over after the sermon and set it up to start playing the last song. And I looked down to see what the first note was. And it was my sermon. I thought, oh no. So I'm like trying to go and get to the different file. And so
B. The first note was B.
Just guess. Yeah. I was just when in doubt. Everything was an A flat yesterday. So anyway, it was familiar, but a little rusty. So, also like I love most worship songs they're not super complicated in the music of them. And so, especially for the bass. And so I like to move. I mean, usually I'm way more animated. And I slipped into it a couple of times, and then I realized, like, I'm not playing the right things, and I'm just jamming along. And, like, I thought we were going here. We didn't go here. I was like, I haven't played this song in, like, 5 years. So, yes, apologies for a few of those times when I got off on.
Well, because we had
these are not the right notes.
The in-ear monitor fiasco where we couldn't figure it out, and then all I did was, change one setting on your channel, and I was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
And so, because we didn't have you in our ears for practice, I could feel you in the stage.
Sure, yeah.
But then during worship, I was like, oh, there's Alex.
There it is.
All right. So we started a new series, Foundations.
Yes.
Based on the Quadrilateral.
Indeed.
Okay, so like was that something that did John Wesley coin that term, the quadrilateral?
No, yeah.
Is this one of those things where like the way he tended to teach theology and stuff, we've kind of dissected it over the many years and said, well, there's four defined parts that we can see, and it's these four things. Well, what has four implicated? Quadrilateral. Like it's just it's a good word. Especially when you get some of those high school kids like coming in after, a Bible study and they start throwing that word around. Yeah, today we were learning about the quadrilateral.
Exactly.
But,
yeah, pinkies up.
And so where did this come from?
So it's in the same vein of exactly what you said. I mean, this is also true in Scripture, where after the fact, theologians through church history, they come up with terminology to try to explain how to understand things or how things work. And so, I mean, even as something as simple as like the Old Testament and the New Testament, in the time of Christ, when they're quoting the prophets, they wouldn't have called it the Old Testament. Those are just the scriptures. And then like the word Trinity is not in Scripture at all. No. That's something that theologians came up with. So this is the same thing where John Wesley did not coin the term quadrilateral, but the way that he sort of understood where we get our information from and how, like, what do we use as our sources? And it was really clear that that Scripture is primary, and that's what this Sunday is all about. I mean, we're doing third grade Bibles. This Sunday is all about Scripture. So the Scripture is primary, but it's separate from, like, during the Reformation, you had like Luther, which was like sola scriptura, which is Scripture only. And that was Luther, one of his big hedges against the Catholic Church. And so this is sort of our understanding of how John Wesley was charting a different course from all of those as well. It's not only Scripture. It's not only Scripture and tradition. It's also our experience. It's also our reason. And a lot of that just comes from the way he taught, the way he preached, the kind of mechanisms he used to spread ministry, the kind of reforms, because he wanted to reform the Anglican Church. He didn't want to start his own thing. And so I also wonder sometimes, in the same way that I wonder, did Paul realize that this letter he wrote to the Corinthians was going to get canonized as this, Scripture for all time?
Oh yeah, we're pulling from that constantly, and people are basing their entire understanding of faith around some of the things that are said in half of a conversation.
Right.
The way I've always loved it referred to as you're reading half of someone's emails.
Right. And it's funny. So there's somebody gave me a sticker that had it's Jesus like doing this, and it says, "Guys, that's not what I meant."
Yep.
And it
Yep.
cracks me up because I also wonder about that when it comes to a lot of Paul's letters. Paul was writing to a specific person or group of people,
That had specific problems.
usually about something going on, kind of in their church. And so that's one of the things that I'll talk about this Sunday is the understanding the difference in Scripture between something that's descriptive and prescriptive. So is this story in Scripture describing something that happened, or is it prescribing action for us to take for all time?
Right.
And those are two very different things. And so there's a lot of that I think you just have to be aware of when you're reading it. So yeah, the quadrilateral is not something that John Wesley came up with, but it definitely is a reflection of how he viewed things. And this is where I also, not to get on a tangent, but I also wonder how far do we go in confusing John Wesley with Jesus? And there's sometimes where, I sit on a lot of these boards that interview potential clergy candidates, and we have this very specific Wesleyan ideology, and we want to make sure that candidates coming in are United Methodists and that they hold that theology and that they can teach it and be leaders in the church. But sometimes I fear that we take that too far, and it's like, well, that's not what John Wesley would have believed. And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
gosh,
look,
I absolutely agree.
I think John Wesley is incredible, but also John Wesley's not Jesus. He wasn't one of the disciples. Like, I don't want to take what he did too far. Let's take him for what he was, which was an incredible pastor who, in a lot of ways, started and formed what we understand today, but not all of it. A lot of it was a modification of the Anglican Church, which came from the Catholic Church. And so that's why you see a lot of these similarities. So I think sometimes we go too far in holding, what John Wesley would have set up. And also, that made sense in his time. And so it doesn't mean that that's relevant to I feel like it's the same way that we hold like the founders of like the American Constitution up. And it's like, well, that's not what, the founders would have wanted. And it's like, first of all, you don't know what they wanted. And second of all, but also things evolve and change. And so let's not say that we have to stick to the letter to something that somebody said hundreds of years ago because that was relevant for their context. Let's find at the heart of what's relevant for us today. So I think that's why you have to just, and this is where a lot of times we run into struggles, is you have to put a lot of thought into it, and you have to understand what people said, the context they were saying it, what their intention was at the time, how did that morph over history, and what does it mean for us today? And outside of an extended Bible study or like a seminary degree, usually Christians don't do any of that background work. And so this is where you get people will pull a quote and they'll fight about it. And I'm
cherry picking Scripture
this is not even 1% of this whole conversation. So I always get a little nervous when we wade into some of these things because I think it's so rich and so valuable, but it's almost like, can we give it enough time to do it justice to really get into all of it and the nuance of it without just, pulling things out of context or kind of missing the point. So I think the more you do it in the aggregate, it works well. So you do a series on the quadrilateral, and maybe in a year you do a series on like grace and how John Wesley understood grace. And then, you do that every once in a while. Maybe you do a study during Lent on something to do with John Wesley. So after 3 or 4 years, all of that together, you start to get a more holistic picture of it. But I think sometimes we try to either put too much stock in it or knock it all out in a quick study. And I just think it's a bigger conversation.
Speaking of bigger conversations, in the Scripture, and you did mention this very in passing, that the Scripture that we read,
I know where you're going
in 1 John, has some big, scary words in there. False prophets, and then more specifically, the AntiChrist is just tossed in there, little peppered in there.
It really is.
And so I figure that this would be a great place to say, like, clear the air. Sure. What is the context in which that word would have been used? So that, because, dude, the amount that Hollywood has taken that word and that concept and turned it into whatever you want to call it is.
Right.
So, no.
So I think that, and I'll be the first to say in all this, I'm not a biblical scholar, and I do not know most of the answers to these questions. Whenever you study scripture in seminary, you don't go deep into this kind of stuff because that's just not
It's more
the
interesting
bulk of what you're talking
from
about.
from like a surface area,
Right.
But when you get into it, it's just understanding history really more than
Yeah.
understanding theology.
Yeah. So first of all, just that's the disclaimer. I am not a biblical scholar. I think there's an important distinction, and you alluded to it in kind of what we see in literature and film and just cultural zeitgeist, is the idea that we sort of assign monsters and these big theatrical experiences to things we see in scripture. And so to me, there's a distinction between, are you talking about something that gets referred to as the AntiChrist, which is an entity or a being that is pure evil? I've seen some movies describe it as like the son of Satan, and it sort of embodies all of it in this being. Or is it something that is antithetical to Jesus? And that's how I think this is talking about, is it's saying something that is anti the message of Christ. It is in opposition to it. So where Christ is preaching selflessness, someone is preaching selfishness. Where Christ is preaching, love, somebody else is preaching judgment and condemnation. And I think that's when you tie that in with the false prophets and the false teachers. It's not that these a lot of times we get this idea of a false prophet as like someone who's a demon or so, like it's some crazy thing. And really it's just saying it's false when it comes to Christianity. It is not reflective of Christ. It is false in that way, not false in the sense that it's demonic or satanic or something like this. It is just not of Christ. And so I think that's where it's easy to really blow that out of proportion. And that's where it's difficult. There's a lot of these in scripture. So one of my favorite ones is when you talk about the Gospel of Luke. At the very beginning of the Gospel of Luke, it's addressed to Theophilus. And Luke says, I'm writing this, O honorable Theophilus. And the question throughout history has been, who is Theophilus? And there's kind of two competing theories. One is that Theophilus was a Roman patron that commissioned Luke to write a biography, because that was very common at the time. Someone would want to know more about something or get the word out, so they would hire someone to go and write this work. And so at the beginning of it, it would be addressed to them as kind of acknowledging this is the patron who funded this is why I'm writing it, and clarifies all of that. The other option, when you look at the definition of Theophilus, so Theo is God, and so Phileus is kind of the end of that word, which is where you get Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love.
Yes.
It's a type of love. It's a word for love
Godly
in Greek.
love.
And so Theophilus, if you just take a straight hard translation, is lover of God. Mm-hmm. And so is it addressed to literally someone named Theophilus, or is it addressed to a lover of God, which is all of us, which is how I like to interpret it, because Luke's gospel is for everyone. It's not just for like Matthew's gospel is much more for a Jewish audience, whereas Luke's gospel is intentionally for everyone, especially Gentiles.
It's got the most detail. I would argue it's the easiest to read and to comprehend at certain times. It's not as convoluted. I think so. Luke was the first of the Gospels that I really did a major study on. I was in that book for a really long time, studying it. And then I went back and I started that entire same study over again, because I was so blown away by how moved I was by the end of it. I was like, well, I don't want this to stop, so I'm just going to do it again.
Yep.
And that's the only book I've ever done that with, where I've gone that much into detail and really dove into it. And even in that case, like one of my favorite things that happened the second time around is a little rabbit trail, but I think it's cool, is that I started disagreeing with some of the conclusions of my study. And it was because the study challenged me more than any other study had to really dive in to go into this like hermeneutical approach and like don't let these be isolated things. Know the historical value of where this is coming from. Contextualize it.
Right.
Also know why it would have been written this way. Blah 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 blah. So going into that, and then the second time around, I started disagreeing with some of their conclusions in the study, and I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at the end of that second run how cool that was, that I wasn't just taking it at face value and saying, well, you know more than I do, so you're smart and I'm dumb, and this is right and I'm wrong. Like,
Right.
So that was a cool thing for me. So I love you bringing Luke into this. That's
Yeah, no, I love that. And Luke is a fan favorite for a lot of people, and I love it for a million reasons. But I think that's so. What I was trying to get at with the Theophilus idea is that you can interpret that two different ways. Is Theophilus an actual person, or is it this idea of someone who's a lover of God? Is the Antichrist an actual being, or is it anything that's antithetical to the message of Christ? And so I think that's where those are two very different. Those have two very different implications.
Yes.
And I think that because we're so teed up with books and movies and artwork, when we see a word like that, we immediately go to some dramatic demonic image. Whereas, I mean, when you really look at what it's saying, test the spirits, because there are false teachers who are teaching a message that is antithetical to Christ's message.
Right.
So be on the lookout for that so that you can measure what is of God. That's his conclusion. So you can know what is of God, not so you can fight some demon running around. And so I think that's
we
where...
can't all be John Constantine.
Well, that's why, and that's going to be, I mean, spoiler alert, the point of my sermon this Sunday is that we have to read the Bible big. You have to read a lot of it. And a lot of times we only read little sections of it. And the answer to the big question we have might be 3 verses later. But if we don't get there, that's the problem. So I think it helps to read it all.
Yeah, I like that. And it is funny because when I think Antichrist, I always default to the movie Constantine, which is one of my favorite movies.
I love it so much.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And
They're trying to make a second one.
Oh no, they've already started. I
love it.
believe they have approved the first draft of the script.
I saw an interview of Keanu Reeves, and they asked him, like, if you could
Reprise
revive
any
any character.
role.
Yeah, you saw it too. And when he said that, because he could have said anything.
He didn't even hesitate. He had
Immediately.
He had that one in the chamber, ready to go, like without any hesitations. Like Constantine, I want to do
because
that.
it kind of has a cult following. It's not a real mainstream movie. And when he
It's
said
so good,
John
though.
Constantine, I was like, yes, this is for us.
Yes, it's been one of my top 5 favorite movies for so long because
I
I
really
feel
love
like
it.
it just makes a lot of what we do way more dramatic and cool than what it actually is in some ways.
Right.
Like we're fighting off demons in the
Yeah.
street, reading certain scriptures, and then demons fall apart, and like all like the weird
The holy flamethrowers
oh
and the
my gosh.
holy water
Dragon's
grenades.
breath,
And
yeah.
I'm just like, these are ridiculous.
So to go the literal opposite direction
Sure,
of
yeah.
that, I love when you were talking about visiting a Methodist church in college and then just going, I'm the youngest person here by probably 35, 40 years.
Right.
That was my exact same experience. I went to the United Methodist Church in Nacogdoches, and I was the youngest person there by, it had to have been close to 40 years. You know,
Yeah.
I was 19 and I visited it because I was like, my mom will be so proud. I visited the look, and I just walked in, and you know, the preacher was in a robe and standing behind a pulpit, and there was a choir and an old lady on an organ. I mean, it's as stereotypical, traditional, small to medium town Methodist church you could ever see. And I just remember I sat in the back, which is unlike me. I'm more of a close to the front kind of guy, and I was just like, I do not like this. This is terrible. And then I tried the Wesley there, which was fine.
Yeah.
It was better. And that was on like Tuesday nights or some weird thing like that. And then there was the cool Bible church that I went to. And everybody was going to that. They fed you and all these things. And in retrospect, like they spent some money on that. They had to hire a college pastor. They were paying for this food because we're college students. We don't have any money. We gave what we could, but like I would usually bring like $3 with me,
Right,
Because
yeah.
that's what I had.
Wouldn't even cover dinner.
Yeah, no, and then the worship band was banging.
Right.
And it was that exact, I had the exact experience. And then tied to that, I love that when you first came in to your own ministry, you're like, I'm going to change the Methodist
Oh, yeah.
church. I did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And then probably got fired from a job because I was trying to change the Methodist Church.
It's tough. And I think that's where I don't know, I've had this lifelong question of why can't we take the most effective methods we see from all the different denominations and put Methodist theology behind it? And I had a very naive view of that when I was younger.
Sure.
And I would say, this huge ministry, why can't we just do this? And I came to realize, well, because all that is a worship service, and it's not even a full worship service in a lot of the ways that we think of what all goes into worship. If you do it every week and that's all you do. And then there was really nothing beyond that because it wasn't trying to be anything else. And it was able to have this huge success because it poured all of its energy and all of its resources into this one weekly event. And that's really great. And it was a wonderful experience, but that was it. I mean, there was nothing else beyond that. And I think that's where I began to understand what is the nature of church? What all do you need out of church? And sometimes that doesn't mean everything. I mean, I think a lot of Methodist churches try to be everything to everyone, and that's why they fail or struggle, is because they get spread too thin.
Yeah.
And they're trying to have
do everything.
1,000, just everything.
Pick
and
a handful of lanes, lean into that.
Yeah.
And I was having this conversation yesterday that my mom goes to a church, and she was talking about how they just have a group or a program for everything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how are they still doing that? Are they all successful? And
Right.
she says, well, I don't know, but they seem to have a group for everything.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's
"Ugh."
tough.
I've been at a church like that,
Yeah.
and it kind of started to crumble, and they had to start like canceling stuff, which of course upsets people.
Always.
And then sometimes
Yeah.
those people will leave, and then all of a sudden, when you try to downsize, you do, and then because you'll run people off, like, well, they took away my quilt making ministry, and that upset me, so I'm going to go find a new church. And I've seen that exact example.
It's tough, and it's
because you hurt somebody.
you do well because it's significant, and people have a lot of connection to it. And I think that that's where I think that you need to have different kinds of churches, because even the biggest churches out there are not for everyone by default of them being huge. We have a lot of people we've talked to at Creekwood who said, like, we went to Cottonwood Creek, we went to Highland Park, or we went to, whatever, name Watermark, name your area mega church. And they were saying it was too big for us. We didn't want a church of 50, but we didn't want a church of 5,000. We wanted somewhere in the middle where we could, have good programming for all of our family, but also we could know people and get involved if we wanted to. And so sometimes it's just, so even the biggest churches that can do quote unquote everything can't do everything. And I think that churches have to know who they are and what their target audience is. And we've been talking about that a little bit, sort of, as our staff, about what is our vision, and with our listening groups about how Creekwood's in a great spot, but we don't have like a clear vision for what our next 3 to 5 years look like that we can all pull in the same direction.
Sure.
And part of that is identifying kind of a target audience. And that is a dicey conversation, because a lot of times you'll get pushback where people will say, well, the church is for everyone. We'll say it is. But if your target audience is everyone, then you can't very effectively evangelized any one particular group. And so I think that's where you have to be honest and say, we're really good at X, Y, and Z. These are areas where if somebody wants to champion it, great. We're not going to stop it, but we're not going to put primary and priority energy behind it, because that's not really what we're called to in our vision.
Right.
There's a great church a mile down the street that does that. We're all working together in concert in some ways. But I think that's where you struggle to see that played out. And I do wonder, because not only do we talk about how Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in our culture, because it is. I mean, a lot of churches are kind of along cultural lines, but also in age demographics, where when you went to that college ministry, so the church that you went to was predominantly, retired, older age adults. The college ministry was all college age students. And so you have kind of pockets. And sometimes that's the right approach. Sometimes it is. I worked at a church that was very clear. It was a very rural setting. And they said, we are a church for, families who have children, because we were very involved in like the schools and that nature, and for more senior adults. And they said, if you're kind of between the ages of 18 and 35, we don't really have anything for you.
Yeah.
And they would name, like, here are all the different ways that you can get plugged into faith in our community. And if there's enough people who want to start that here, we would love to do that, but we don't want to be disingenuous, and we don't want to say, oh, you're 23, you just graduated college. Great. You're going to love our church, because you're not. You're going to be the only person. You're going to be too old for the teenagers, and you're going to be 10, 15 years removed from the next person in your age. And that's was generous, because we didn't have a lot of 35-year-olds. So you were really more like 30 or 40 years removed from people. And it was so bizarre, because the pastor in the church were just okay with it. Every church I'd been in was like, we have to get young adults. And I love that church where they said, that's not what we do. And if we do one day, that's fantastic, but we're not going to make ourselves feel guilty about that. And we don't want to try to lie to people when they come here that this is a place for them.
Right. You can't
unless they bring 20 friends with them
into something that is doomed to fail, because now you've like spent money to promote, to get whatever, gear, or renovate a space, or all the things that you would spend money to do that. So now you've got the resources poured into this, so you feel obligated to do it. But if it's just openly failing, and you're just like, well, what are we doing wrong here? And it's a hard thing to happen. And that's always one of those things where, boy, if you have the simple answer that none of us have thought of, like, go sell that, because you're sitting on a gold mine. Because I haven't heard one answer that just feels like got it.
I just think if you want to be successful as a church, you have to define what that is. You can't accomplish goals if you don't set goals. And by doing that, you're closing a lot of doors. And that's a struggle for a lot of people in anything, in a business, personally. When you make a decision personally to invest time in this hobby, you are closing doors for other things that you won't have time and money to do. And so I think that's where you have to be sure that what you're doing is really what you're called to do, and be okay pouring a lot of energy into that, knowing that that means you're not going to do these other things. And that's okay. Because when you try to be everything to everyone, you usually end up being a little bit to everyone, because you just don't have anything left, and you burn people out. And ministries fight over space, and when things can't make it, there's a lot of pain that goes with that. So I just think you have to be clear about who you are and revisit that constantly, because it changes and it morphs.
So that goes to one of the last things I wanted to talk about that ties in with this, is the idea of visiting other churches, specifically other denominations or non-denomination. And it just when you are career ministry, like, I'm sure you and I could swap stories of just, I went to this, AOG church and it was wild. I went to this one non-denominational and it was crazy, and they were doing and I've got tons of stories like that. But I just wanted to kind of talk big picture about the right way to do that, and what to look for, because I think everybody should. I really do. I think it's important that everybody should kind of get a little taste on some level of what else is out there. Different styles of worship, different approaches to understanding Scripture. Because I was watching this thing last night about how our brains at 40 start to slow down our ability to cognitively remember the day-to-day things. But when we are challenging that and introducing new ideas, it changes the way. Because if everything is similar all the time, eventually your brain just kind of gets used to it. But if you're introducing new ideas, it makes you sharper to retaining things and being more ready to take on new ideas. So what would you say might be a good approach to visiting other denominations, hearing other perspectives that way, without it challenging your own personal
Well, I think if it does, that's a good conversation to have. But this is one, I do have some tangible ideas in a second, but this is one conversation that I think is really great when we think about, there's a lot of benefit when we hire a new staff person if they have a very different ministry experience, because they're going to see things differently. They're going to bring in a fresh perspective. If you only ever have people coming in leadership who have grown up in Allen, went to school at Lovejoy, lived in this area, gone to Creekwood forever. I mean, if that's 100%, you can start to get an echo chamber. And the language that was said to me once is, you have to be careful that you don't make your world the world. And I think a lot of times, we get in kind of these echo chambers, and it happens in the church all the time. And I've always wondered, we'll do all these events, and whether it's with clergy or continuing education things, where we'll talk about something and we'll bring in like a presenter, but it's usually like a pastor. And even if we're talking about I remember we went to one that was like alternative revenue streams for churches. We're in a day and age where like charitable giving is going down across the board, and a lot of churches are struggling to maintain their budget just through giving, but they have a lot of property that during the week they're not really using. And so are there ways to leverage the assets we have to try to create alternative forms of revenue so that you can sustain your ministry in multiple ways? And we had pastors come in and talk about this. And I thought, I don't know that clergy are the most adept at business ideas. And so why don't we have entrepreneurs and business leaders and other people who do this for a living much more effectively come and share with us? So some of that, you get a little kind of the blind leading the blind in the middle of all that. But all to say, I think that diversity of experience is great. We talk about the challenges of the itinerancy system where they move all of us clergy around all the time. But one of the benefits of that is that you get people with different perspectives. And there are things that I see about Creekwood because of different churches I've worked in. And there are also things I don't see about Creekwood because I haven't been here. And I think all of that is a strength and a weakness. And I think that trying to bring all those different perspectives to bear is wonderful if it's done well. So to tangibly answer your question, I think it's good, especially if I love visiting other churches, especially if I'm
talked about that.
on
It's so
vacation
fun.
or I'm going to see family members or something and they want to go to church. They're like, oh, you don't have to come. And I'm like, oh, because they think you're a pastor. You obviously don't want to go to church again on your week off. And I'm like, no, this is like dessert for me. I absolutely want to go.
You have no responsibility
At all. And so when you work in a church, you being able to just freely worship doesn't happen very often because it's your
so
job.
Wonderful.
So part of it can be, so when you go to a really great church that you don't have anything to do and you can just be, I love. And worst comes to worst, if you go to an off the rails, unhinged place, your inner, you can judge it and talk trash to your friend. And you shouldn't be that way. But even at worst, you're going to get a comical experience out of it because it's what you do for a living.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's where it is fun. I love doing it. But I think if you're going to try to visit churches in the earnest sense, like you're talking about, I think it's to take note of, what is different, what stands out to you, what really moved you, and what was it about it that moved you? What were some things that made you really think about why did they do this or why don't we do this or some of the nature of that? Because most things, I don't want to say most things, things in churches are often done with a lot of intention. A lot of thought
if
goes
they're doing
into
it right, I believe.
A lot of thought goes into why, or at one point, a lot of thought went into it, and then churches later do it because we've always done it. But usually, at one point or another, a lot of thought goes into why you do what you do. Not everything, but a lot of times it's trying to identify what is that thought. Why does this church do what it does? Where did this come from? Is this an ancient tradition they've held on to, or is this a new idea this church had? But the best way, I think, because a lot of people will say, well, I want to visit a new church, but I don't want to miss my church on Sundays, and I don't know where to go, and that can be intimidating. Now, with live streaming, you can visit any church anytime.
Yep.
And so I've done that. I love watching other churches' live streams. And whether it's just supporting my friends who are preaching or starting a new Sunday in our Methodist context, or it's seeing something fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And I follow a lot of social media accounts that are, maybe it's like worship leader, accounts or like worship technology accounts, just because that's my background. And I like all that stuff to see kind of what's new.
Follow preacher sneakers?
I do know what you're talking about, but no, I don't follow that one.
That will make you feel kind of cringe a little too often.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Hey, Stephen Fwerdick was wearing this Louis Vuitton jacket that's $5,600 while he was preaching on Sunday. It's just like
which also blows my mind because I'm like, what these people make, so I don't like. Are they tithing, or are you expecting them to give 80% of their income? I have a whole speech about that, but
we'll have to do a separate podcast on it.
During stewardship, I love to talk about it, but I think there's there's a really important tool that we have now to use to see how other churches do things and to hear how and to listen to different preachers. And I have a lot of people at different churches I've been at, whether it's the pastor that I follow who they really dearly love, who they'll say, like, I'm going to keep watching their sermons online, but like, I'm still going to be here. I don't want you to feel like I'm leaving the church. Or I had some people tell me, like, we're going to tune in and watch you on Sundays, but we'll still be here at our church, but like, we're also going to watch you. And they were just trying to be supportive to say that they, appreciated my sermons, but I love that they were still staying plugged into their church. And so I think that gives you a great opportunity to, if you've got preachers you love, there are preachers that I love that I listen to.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's a great, tool that we have now is you can be inspired by a lot of different people. You can learn, you can grow, you can hear different perspectives. And it's not a betrayal of your church. Like, you're deepening your theology and your faith in different ways. But so some of it's just access to that. You can have other people pouring into you, but also it's a way to do that kind of research and to see, why 100%. Do you do church like that? And I didn't know that we sang that same hymn together, but you sing different words. And so it's interesting to see those elements. And you can't get if you want to get the whole parking lot, hospitality, what does it feel like in the room? You can't get all that on the live stream, but you can get the fundamentals of a worship service. Sure. What are they saying? What are they doing? How does it differ? And I think in the context, especially of what this last sermon was about, which is really the sources that undergird our theology, you can pick up on that real quick. When you watch a live stream, if they're doing a lot of liturgy and singing a lot of hymns that have a lot of history, obviously tradition really matters to that church. And that can be sort of regardless of the style. Usually we relate it to traditional worship and modern worship, but there are a lot of things that we do, even here in modern worship, that have roots that go back. It's not like we're just making everything up on the fly.
Right.
And so I think that is the best tool that we've had in such a long time for us to challenge ourselves and expose ourselves to fresh ideas and be inspired by things.
R&D is a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. And getting to check out what other churches, especially local churches. Cause don't get me wrong. Like, am I a little curious as to, what off the wall thing was said in North Carolina, some big mega church that's really popular? Not really.
Right.
Like, I've watched enough sermons from like megachurch pastors that are either controversial or just really popular. But for me, I find it more interesting. What's going on around here? Like, let's check out. Hey, what's Mitchell Boone talking about this Sunday at First Methodist Dallas? Hey, what's Clayton talking about at First Richardson? Hey, to see what's going on at these other churches that where we do have some connection. And you probably have friends that go to these churches. And so that's where I find it for me. And then every once in a while, I'll spoil myself and intentionally go watch something that I know I'm going to kind of hate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who doesn't love that? I think you're so right, though. And I think especially I'm always curious if there's a church in our mission field that's growing like crazy. Yeah. I want to know, like, what is it that's drawing people in? What is it that they have, super fancy, coffee and donuts and a ball pit for the kids, and they're giving out free iPads at the door? Like, is it theological? Is it the kind of message they're sharing? Is it just they have momentum? We talked a lot about this in some of our clergy settings about how crowds draw crowds.
Oh, yeah.
And like, don't compare yourself to a church that is in a fundamental size category, because churches draw people for different reasons.
Yep.
And ministries work at different types of churches for different reasons. It doesn't always mean that they're better at it than you. It might have nothing to do with how much work or how much quality went into the programming. It might be that it's just a different context, so that works.
It's just they got hot at the right moment, and right now they're hot.
Luck plays, coincidence. All these things play so big into it, and we don't like that because we can't control that. Right. But I think it's also important to remember, hey, give yourself a break when you're in a little bit of a lull. And then when you catch the fire, because sometimes you do, don't sleep on it. Like, hit the gas, man, because that's not going to last forever.
No.
And when you're in the middle of a wave, you really want to try to kind of capture what that is. And to know you're not going to be able to recreate this all the time, and to give yourself permission to say, I want to take advantage of the season we're in, but let myself off the hook when it fades or when it plateaus, because it will. And I think that's true in every business, in every relationship, in every part of life. When things are going great, you think they're always going to go great. And when they don't, it feels like failure. And that's not always true.
Yeah.
Sometimes you were just in a great season and then that season ended and you came back down to normal, not you went down into failure.
Yeah.
But we have a hard time separating coming down off a high to failure. And we usually think they're the same thing.
There's some great pastors that have done a good job owning that like, hey, like we just got hot at the right time and had more eyeballs on us. And there's a variety of reasons that for the most part may not have even been within our control. We just did a good job of harnessing it while we had it. I have a particular church in mind when I think of that, and I'm still friends with some people who work there, and they're still doing and like almost nobody talks about this church anymore, but they're still doing ministry. They're still doing great things, and I love that. Like they aren't perturbed by this notion that they're just from a numbers standpoint a shell of what they were 15 years ago.
Definitely.
And so I love seeing that they're still doing great ministry, that they're still affecting change, that they're still bringing people to know the Lord and that kind of thing. And that's cool to see, like a once great big popular thing. It's like, yeah, we never stopped.
Right.
Just we just cooled off a little bit for reasons A through F. And yeah, it just.
And I think that's just to kind of put a summary on the beginning of this series, and the whole point of kind of why I wanted to do it is a lot of times when you watch different churches, you immediately love or hate something. And a lot of it has to do with this concept of what we talked about yesterday on Sunday about, are you allowed to ask questions? Where do you get your source material from? What do you believe, and how is that communicated, and what is people's agency in all of that? And I think that that's where a lot of people haven't done the work to articulate what it is. So I hear a lot of people say, you know, we came to Creekwood and we just loved it. What is it about Creekwood? I don't know. I just felt a connection. I just felt like it was home. I just loved the way of being here. And so part of this is to try to, one, educate people about Methodism who don't know. They might be new to the United Methodist Church. They may have no clue who John Wesley is or any of this. And I love it. And so trying to spread that information in a way that's more palatable and easier. It's not like a boring history lesson, but also to try to give people language to say, oh, this is what I love. And I've heard people in the past, whenever we've talked about things like this, where they'll say, I couldn't put my finger on it, but now I know what it is. It's that I grew up in churches where doubt was seen as faithlessness and questions were seen as, you know, sinfulness, and you weren't allowed. I mean, you had to take everyone's word for it, and it was very judgmental, and you were never measuring up. And I felt like I was getting yelled at every Sunday, and I didn't feel like my faith really had room to grow. And here I have felt like my faith has room to grow, and God's big enough for my questions. And I never had put that into words before. And I think that matters, one, because it's nice to know what you love about it, but also it gives you language to go talk to other people and say, hey, are you looking for a church? And they'll say, oh no, like church is so judgy. And then you can say, I had that experience as well, and then I found this one, and let me tell you why I love it. And so that's sort of my Eat Your Vegetables reason for why I think these series can be great, is I'm always thinking, how can we give hope to people in our community who feel alone, who only have a negative judgmental view of religion? How can we try to give us all tools to go and, you know, bring that, the balm in Gilead? How can we bring that, you know, kind of hope that the church isn't always like that, and there are other ways of being that are more, you know, hope filled. So,
and you use this quote, and I hope you use it for the whole series, because for me, it just takes me back to my childhood. At the end of every episode of Reading Rainbow, LeVar Burton would say, "But don't take my word for it.
Yeah,
go check it out for yourself."
Yep. Yeah. And I think that that's something that a lot of churches don't say. They say the opposite. They say, this is the truth. You will take my word for it, and don't question it. And I always, anytime I hear anything that leans into that, I'm always like, I'm out, man. Like, if you want me to think you're the only one that has all the answers, no, there's no way. You don't even believe that. So there's no way I'm going to believe it either. But there are some churches where they're like, we have it all figured out, and we know all the answers. And I'm like, that's a
Those are the churches
claim.
we watch online so we can laugh. And That's that's like that little bit eating ice cream. You can't do that too much because then you'll just get unhealthy.
Judgmental, but it
feels kind of good sometimes
that
just to go, hey,
sarcasm is
we're not those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Good palate cleanser. Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us. This is going to be a good series.
I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll catch you next time.
See y'all.
Peace.